Welcome to the Wild Conversation, where human being and human doing converge, reshaping the world of leadership, culture, and performance. Today, we get to have a wild conversation with Phil Goodman. He has completed our Wild Executive Fellows program. In fact, he and I got to be in the same cohort together, and he's also a Wild affiliate. Phil Goodman is the founder and managing director of Talent Realized, a firm that provides small businesses, nonprofits, and churches with access to a fractional chief people officer, the CEO's trusted people advisor. With 20 plus year career spanning missionary work to serving as an HR executive at high growth tech companies, Phil is deeply committed to creating life-giving workplaces that lead to life-changing impacts. And he likes to say, your people problems don't require more administrative support. They need the wisdom of someone who's been there and done that. Phil, thank you for being with us today.
Thanks, Savith. Thanks, Dr. McKenna. I'm stoked to be here. This is really an honor to be on your podcast. And yeah, from being in the community, over the years to now being here is just a little surreal, to be honest.
I am so excited for this conversation today. And we are going to play a quick round of wild cards. I didn't prep you for this in our session right before I pressed record, but you're familiar with wild cards. I just
I am.
pulled out 10. So we'll pick a number between 1 and 10. I'll go first. I'll answer. You choose a number. You'll go next. And Rob will round us out. Today, I'm going to choose 7. And it says, what would change if you knew why you are here and what you should do next? I love this question because, in fact, today we are having our own team profile conversation for Wild Leaders. And so I have been spending time this week answering these questions. I have jumped into our mission and what my role is in that. And so I look forward to moving with intention, purpose, and drive. So that is what will happen as a result of that. Phil, pick a number.
Let's go with 9.
9. If you stepped back and took a moment to pause, what would be different?
I would be moving with more intention and focus. And this was actually, I'm just coming off a week where me and my wife celebrated our 20th anniversary, and we actually had 4 days away without kids and had some intentionality to really sit and focus and figure out where we're going. And so that question is very timely as well. Like I'm just coming out of that and it's reiterating, yep, like among all the chaos to have a moment just to sit and think and be like, what are we actually doing? Where are we going? Helps us move in the pathway with more intentionality.
There's power in that pause. Love it.
Yep. I'll go number 2.
All right. Rob, what character virtue in you is a strength, but if overdone, becomes problematic for you?
Sometimes it's conviction. I was with a group of students from the University of Washington last night, and I realized, I bring so much conviction that I want so much for them that sometimes it can be a little bit intimidating. And I think I added enough care in that it softened the landing, but there's so many things that I want for them that I do know that I have to be very careful though, because my conviction can sometimes with certain people I've been told that directly, Phil, before that, yeah, you were a little intimidating. And I'm like, I just feel things so deeply. So that's probably that character trait. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Sabbath. Phil, this is so fun to have this conversation. I'm so glad you came on the podcast. And I would just love to start with this. I know you've been a leader in human resources and in the strategic space for a while, and you now run a company, Talent Realized, and your tagline is helping CEOs move from reactive to proactive people strategy. I want, along with that mission, I would love to just have us hear a little bit about you. Tell us about you and how you got here.
Yeah, thanks for that. My journey into starting finally realized really started, at my perfect company. I was at Subsplash. I was their head of people for almost 6 years, and it really was the perfect situation, perfect company, leadership, goals, impact that we were having around the world. And I just had a calling, like you talk about purpose and calling. And I just had this calling that, for me, God was calling me to something else. And so that really started my journey of seeing one, like, small businesses, those nonprofits, churches struggling on the people side. And a
Mm,
lot of it is just putting out fires, dealing with drama and the chaos that ensues with all of that. And especially on the church world, that definitely was a kind of, I was seeing that in Subsplash. We were hiring a lot of people coming out of churches that were running away from something, not running to something. And
mm,
so that was really like stuck with me. And started creating this desire to do something about it. And I was like, man, I love the fractional world as it was blossoming. Um, and to be able to be like, man, I could work with not just one company, but a dozen or more companies and be able to make an impact and create these life-giving environments for them. Um, they don't need me full time, and they don't couldn't afford me, or they don't need that capacity, but to have access and be able to support those leaders in that time and to pause with them and to evaluate where we're at, and how we can move to a culture that is life-giving, that's proactive, that has high levels of trust and hope and everything else. That was really what was stirring in me. But it took some time. I had never started a company. Probably think about trust. Like, I don't know if I trusted myself to start this. I was like, I don't know. I haven't done this before, but I had others that, believed in me and that were coaching me through it and, advising me and encouraging me to do that. For me, that was kind of really, I had a pivotal moment where I had to decide, am I going back to the W-2 world, or do I start this thing? For me, I just felt that this was the calling that, for me, God was calling me to. I just had to be obedient and walk in that and make that decision. I did that. I'm coming up on the 2-year mark, May 4th, Star Wars Day, which was pretty funny to happen on, but that was the day I
yeah.
started it 2 years ago. It's been just a wild ride ever since. Just crossed supporting. I've now worked with over 30 companies in that, 2 years. Just people keep coming, and so the need's there. People are experiencing those problems, and a lot of it, uh, they're experiencing drama, they're experiencing things that they've never gone through before, and to have access to someone with wisdom, experience is really valuable to them.
What so I some of our audience may not know what what the fractional world is, and
Yep.
some of them certainly do, and I want them to make sure they don't think it's a fractured world. And so will you describe that? What is the fractional world? What did you mean by that?
Yeah. Yeah. So it really is, like, if you think of it, almost like the gig economy for executives, where I work with companies and I sit in their org chart. So I'm not a consultant coming in doing a project and then I'm out. I'm not an interim where I'm there 30, 40 hours a week. And so it's kind of in between there, where I'm sitting in their org chart. I'm putting on the chief people officer hat for them, and I'm thinking and acting and and there for them as that advisor in that capacity. And so it's an ongoing, recurring, I try to get them to think of hiring me. Like, you are hiring me to be on your team. And I'm going to, set up, we're going to create the SOW. So, like, at what level that is. And then I'm going to be there. I'm going to be, guiding you through what's our business objectives, our business goals. How do we tie the people strategy to that? What are the opportunities on the people side we have? And what are the challenges? I'm helping them navigate that, just like I would if I was their full-time chief people officer.
Hmm.
But I'm just meeting with them, and interacting with them at a smaller percentage of the time. So some, it might be a couple hours a month, some a couple hours a week. It just kind of depends on, what the need is in that organization.
So as that's very helpful to understand what a fractional executive looks like. So as an organization brings you in, is it more than a consulting role? Are you actually executing on their some of their HR things that they're experiencing and needing to get done?
Yeah, yep. I mean, sometimes I'm having conversations with employees and having coaching conversations with them, connecting them with health insurance brokers, and we're making decisions on what health insurance we're going to go with, retirement benefits. So I'm advocating for them, and I'm, just like
Yeah.
I would and representing them, with brokers. Or it could be, we're designing out compensation, plans or job descriptions or performance management, based on their systems, that they have. I'm trying to be a chameleon with each one. No, I'm a little bit tool agnostic, but I'm really coming in and saying, okay, what do you
Yeah.
have? What's the need? And then how do we build it with what you have and where you're going? And then helping give them the templates and the strategy. But oftentimes I'm partnering with an admin on the team who might be executing and doing payroll and benefits
Yeah.
administration.
Yeah.
They're in the weeds doing it, and I'm helping coach and guide them and
Okay.
then stepping in with the leader when they need it.
I wanted people who are listening to hear that because sometimes business owners have a little bit of a hesitancy to bring in someone who's just going to be a consultant and give them advice. And most of them are like, I need someone who's actually going to get stuff done on the ground. I mean, I can imagine so many people needing what you do. If I could bounce back into your own development for just a moment before we continue, you mentioned this transition 2 years ago and out of the W-2 world. What's fascinating about that is, in many ways, you're still in the W-2 world. You're just signing the front of checks instead of the back, as most founders
Yeah.
will say, so it's
Yep.
like that's the big shift. What have been a couple of the big personal lessons that you have learned about running your own business?
Sometimes it is hard to be disciplined every day when it's just you. There's so much to do. There's so many things that you could do and want to do. And then navigating how am I balancing that with family, being there present with the kids and all their, school and sports and all the things. And
Yeah.
so it's being disciplined. And for me, I've had to surround myself with others that are going through it that can hold me accountable. Because
Mm,
when you have a W-2 job, like you have a boss, usually that's holding you accountable and saying, hey, what's the goals for this quarter? Where are you going? What do you need to do? For me, like I need that motivation. I need that pressure and I need those goals that are stretching that I can run to. Being an entrepreneur and kind of doing your own thing, you need that. I need that support. And so
yeah.
having people and the groups, both on the business side, pushing me on like, hey, what are you accomplishing in this next 2 weeks on your business? Then holding me accountable of how did that go? And then also on the personal side, having groups that are holding me accountable of how are you growing personally? I have a couple of different groups that hold me accountable in different ways, but I've had to be intentional about creating those. And I learned very quickly that that was needed. And I started gathering people around me to be like, hey, you want to be a part of this group? I need it. I bet you do as well.
Yeah.
And it's been fun to see the response in that. And then, us all pushing each other through this.
I want to ask you in just a minute about your deployment of the Wild Trust Index because you've got some experience now of doing that. But before we do that, if we could go at a little higher level, I'm curious, as a people strategy leader, like from your perspective and where you sit, why does trust matter for you and every client you serve?
I love how Donald Miller compares it to a plane. Like you have a business and you've got, your wings, which are your sales and marketing and your engines, and then you have your fuselage is your operations, and the fuel is your gas or your cash flow. But then inside, you have to have someone flying the plane, you have to have a crew, and you have passengers that are on the plane. And for me, that is the area that I sit in as
Mm,
a chief people officer. And for me, like that is a critical element. Like you got on a plane, if you didn't trust the pilot, if you didn't trust the crew, you probably wouldn't step foot on that plane.
yeah.
If you are the crew and others aren't following through on it, like you're going to crash at some point. Like you're going to, like, if you don't trust them, you're either going to get off that plane, you're going to be reacting in a way and responding in a way, like working in a way that is protection, is you're protecting yourself. So I've always looked at it like, yep, like we have people in the organization and trust is a key. You need to rely on others to do their job, that they have this, the skills, the qualifications, that they're, that they are doing what they say they're going to do at the right time. It's such a vital part of just the business, of what a business is. You've got the sales marketing engines, but then you've got the people inside that you need to make sure, like, do I trust that person? Can they have a very specific role to keep this plane flying? Do they know what it is? And can I
Mhm.
trust them to do that? Because if I don't, like, there's going to be most likely harm to us. Like we are looking through that lens of, at times of like, what does this mean for me? And
Yeah.
is this going to cause me harm, or is this going to be something that's going to get me to the destination that I want to go to? In that you're evaluating the people around you, through that lens. And so from me on the people side, that's the lens that I look through. I see that trust is that critical element that people are thinking is that, one of the strongest filters they're seeing. Because ultimately, like, can you do what you can, say you can do? Can you get us to where I think we want to go?
Yeah.
Um, so
Yeah.
critical element in the business side.
One of the things I've been thinking about in the last week is one of the places where trust is so relevant to all of us is car maintenance. And I think about it related to, when I don't know, I know enough to be very, very dangerous when it comes to cars, as my dad would say, automobiles, but in motors, and so I do know a little bit, but today there's so little that I understand with all the electronic nature of cars. And so you take your car in, and I've had recent experiences with this, and then you have no idea what's happening, what they're doing under the hood, because you don't understand engines. They could explain to me
Mhm.
water pumps and oils and all kinds of stuff all day long, and it's all just like another language, right? So the level of trust that I have to have in that mechanic, you experience as a customer kind of this like, this didn't go the way I thought it would, or the part that I thought that was going to be fixed wasn't, or the price kind of went up from where we started, or all these different things that are being discovered in the process. And when I look at organizations like that, because we study trust, I see that there are probably issues that track back into the stream of their delivery process of whatever service they do. And it's true of every business, right? That
Mhm.
where these breakdowns of trust, people may not have the resources they need, or they're not having the conversations, or the handoff between the mechanic and the person who's actually dealing with the customer up at the desk, is off. One of the things also is like some teams are experiencing, for example, they'll describe, I heard a leader recently describe like a staleness in their team where they almost couldn't even name it. They couldn't even understand how to put a name to it, but it was like things were pretty healthy, but there was concern that there were cracks beginning to form in the foundation of their work together. That was connecting performance and their feelings of fulfillment and all that. But then other teams that we deal with, right? There's actual just existing toxicity. There's a whole different level of, it's
Mhm.
not staleness. It's like things have got to change. And like you were describing, like I'm gonna go.
Mhm.
I'm gonna
Mhm.
leave for somewhere else. And so often trust is treated like, I almost describe this week, I've been thinking about it this way, like a vapor. It's like it's in front of us. I can kind of see it, but then I try to grab it and it disappears. You know what
Mhm.
I mean? It's like I'm trying to put my hands around it. And so we create the Wild Trust Index, which you have deep experience of deploying,
Mhm.
and as a way to actually assess and measure what too often feels like a vapor. It
Mhm.
feels like this thing that we know is important, like air, that I have to
Mhm.
get my hands around this, and then assessing trust at the personal, the team, and the organizational level. I would love to hear, like, what has been your
Yeah.
experience of deploying the Wild Trust Index with those strategic clients that you have?
Like you said, it's that vapor. There's that unknown effect of trust. It's hard to see, but you feel it. And like I've thought of it as the wind as well. You can feel it there, you just can't see it, but you can see the effects of it, right? You can see the leaves rustling. Like, all right, the wind's there. When you're sailing, you can tell when it's there and when it's not, when you're just sitting there on the water.
Huh.
But for me, with doing it with clients and having them go through it, it's really provided, the visibility into it. And a lot of times it's been the aha moment. There hasn't been a lot of surprise, but it's been the yes, like I'm feeling that and I was sensing it, but here it is actually in writing. If you put a wind instrument up and then you started measuring it, like, wow, it's really windy. You think it's windy, and you're like, wow, it's actually 50-mile-an-hour winds right now. You're like, yes, that's what I thought it was. Now I'm getting the validation that it is. And so that's been, I think, the thing that I've noticed going through it with clients. These owners, founders, they've experienced it, they've known it's there, and the elements of the trust that are low haven't been surprises. They've been yes, and now it's giving them motivation and clarity on what they need to change. Oh,
Mhm.
now I see that dial. Yep, that confirms what I thought. And now, how do we actually change that? How do we actually increase it? And it gives us an action plan to move forward with. Even for leaders, like they may sense it, but their leadership team might not. And because a lot of times as founders, like you see things and you have that intuition that sometimes your leadership team doesn't. for you as a founder, oh, like I was feeling that. Now I see it. Now my whole leadership team can see it as well. And we can align on these things and be like, hey, this is why I was talking about clarity and why we need goals and objectives, because it's a trust thing. Like our people don't trust that we have these and, have the clarity of what they're working on and why it's important. And this is why these things that I was, been feeling we need to do, why it's actually important to do.
Trust is this connective tissue between the invisible and the visible aspects of our businesses. The mechanic has all the parts and the machines, hopefully, necessary
Yeah.
to work on my car and all the
Yeah.
resources they need to do that. And all the organization has its mission statements and its goals. But then if that invisible portion, which is probably more than half in most cases, right, of the way people are thinking, feeling, and maybe not telling the whole story, that trust starts to break down. A recent guest of ours, Phil, said that, and this is probably the most empirically trained, an old friend of mine, Alexis Fink, and just, as data as you could possibly imagine. And I asked her a question about why measurement matters. And she said something that I echo, is she said one of the most important things is that it begins an important conversation. How have organizations and leaders you're interacting with responded to the concept of measuring trust?
It's honestly still something they're grappling with. They're like, wait, it's still a fairly new concept for them of like,
Mm.
wait, there's something that measures it, and what does that entail? And how do you actually really get to that, really measure it? So they're curious, but it's still a foreign, like they're used to, measuring their financials and, they have their key, their KPIs. But this trust, everyone, says trust is one of the most important things for an organization. Like it's all over. But then it's still this interesting concept of, wait, now we can measure it. And it's like, oh, how? I know it's important. Wait, you're telling me we can? And then tell me more about it.
Building trust in your business starts with being able to measure it so that you can create a pathway for change. Our Wild Trust Index measures the drivers of trust at the personal, team, and organizational levels. We are building the largest database on the drivers of trust inside of organizations. This survey will inform growth imperatives and the necessary organizational change needed to fuel that growth. For more information, visit wildleaders.org, click on the Wild Trust platform, and get started with the Wild Trust Index today.
Are there certain things that you would say it has prompted for them? Do you have any examples of things that when they did see, oh, I could measure these things. And by the way, you don't get trust by talking about trust. So if I tell you to trust me, that might have a little bit of fuel, but not a lot. It's going to be a bunch of other things that we know from research have are what actually builds trust. And so I'm kind of curious, as they've said, okay, let's measure this, let's do this, and then they see your feedback on, so here's how you're rating at the personal level, the team level, the organizational level. What kinds of things is it prompted for them?
I've seen mainly a prompting why they want to have action. I've paired it with an HR assessment, like of their whole HR health, like org health assessment. Because a lot of times I've been going in before, doing this measurement, and I'm seeing it and I'm seeing these things, but sometimes they're like, oh, yeah, we know we need job descriptions, but it's more of a compliance issue. I've been, telling people like this is a trust issue. Like they need to be clear on what you expect from people and what performance looks like. Now they're going through and they're seeing it through the lens of trust. And now they're saying like, oh yeah, like we want to have a high trust organization. There are these things that like we can do to actually increase that. And so that's the motivation for, yeah, we need to, be clear on, maybe it's a policy that we have or performance. Like what does performance look like? Now like I had one client that they hadn't measured performance. They hadn't done any performance conversations for 3 years. And finally they were like, I think we need to do this. I was like, yeah, you actually need to do that. We need to be clear on people's performance. They're creating their own story about their performance. Most oftentimes it's skewed, and we need to be clear on, what their performance. But first, we need to clarify what our expectations of their performance are
Uh,
and what we're experiencing, like what we want from them. What's winning look like? What is their role? And when we look at it through the trust lens, like we don't trust them, they don't trust us. Now we can be more clear. We can build a performance management built on trust. And that's the foundation. And it really inspires them to want to do those things because they don't see it as these people or, traditional HR things that they have to do, compliance things. They see a lot of the things now that of like, how do we do this to build trust? And these are some of the key things of that we can do to implement and actually increase trust. So it's spurred on, and it's created a different lens really of them seeing these projects and things that they can do, which a lot of times HR professionals are preaching, but I feel like we've just been preaching it from the compliance lens. And how do we
Mhm.
reimagine these things through the trust lens?
Yeah.
And these are why they're there, and let's build them with that perspective in mind, not like if we do with that perspective in mind, the compliance will take care of itself.
So, Phil, back when I was a professor, you know, I was a professor for 25 years. My students, they wanted the multiple choice test. So tell me exactly is this going to be on the test? You know, that's the famous line from students, right? And
Yeah,
I was more interested in the way that they were actually processing the material. And
yeah,
so, so I was like, I don't care if you memorize this. I want to know what you think about it. And I know that you've had a chance to read our State of Trust at Work report.
yeah,
And I was curious, as you read through that, there's a lot in there. I know it's a
yeah,
significant document. What is it that you would want your clients to
yeah.
understand that are some truths that emerge from that study?
I'll give you one at the personal, the team, and then the organizational level,
Yeah.
that stood out. And it really is reaffirming to all the things that I've been preaching to my clients for years now, right? At the personal level, um, one thing that stood out was they build teams that know each other. That really, like the connection and the relational connection, is so critical. And a lot of times in work and business, people hire someone and then they're like, here's your job, go and do it. And then they become an island and they don't feel like they have that best friend or even that people know them and value them and see them for their whole person. They just see them as their work person. You're just here to do a task and do a job. There's not that connection. But really, if you want a high performing, high trust team, building a team that know each other, that know, hey, this is my background and my history and why I'm here and how I operate and my family and things like that. It provides context and that relational connection that we all crave. We all crave it. And if leaders aren't engaging with that, they're ignoring a view of like who we are and what our core needs are. You can do that in ways that are balancing, oversharing and, being professional in the workplace with, and also creating an environment where people feel known. One of the activities I've done that I've gotten that is the personal story slideshow. So I've done this in team meetings, and, off sites where they just put together a Pek Chakucha presentation, a 20 slide, 20 seconds per slide, and each slide is one picture from their life and
Mm,
they share it. Every time I've done it, there's been tears at least a couple of times during the presentation. People see it and they leave that feeling like, wow, I know the people I'm working with at such a deeper level. Even for people that have worked for each other for over 10 years, they're
yeah.
seeing pictures of their childhood. I had no idea that you went through that in your childhood. And now they see them from a different perspective. Their trust actually increases because they have a deeper understanding of who that person is and who's God's created them to be, what their life experiences have been. That has
Yeah.
been just a hit of yes, we need to build that. And it creates that personal level trust of who we are going through those exercises and be able to share our experiences. It brings that self-awareness up as well and how we show up. And it links to like, who we are and where we're going.
Yeah.
um, Team level, meaningful conversations. People avoid meaningful conversations, especially ones that involve conflict. And that's
Uh-huh.
oftentimes why they bring me in. I'm experiencing this pain. I just want to fire this person. And I'm like, let's pause for a second
Slow down.
and slow down.
Yeah.
Is this just because we don't like conflict and having, uncomfortable conversations? When you can do it, when you can do it well, those are very meaningful and they increase trust. So that stood out to me of one, like composure, like how low that actually still is. I honestly don't see that increasing. I almost think that's human nature. Like just we avoid conflict and it's a brain protectionism, like probably amygdala response,
Yeah.
where if we don't have the skills and the training to have healthy conflict and to have those hard truth with love conversations, like you say, we
Yeah.
just avoid them. And we go in that fight or flight mindset because probably our experiences have not been great in the past.
Yeah.
But how important that is to team level trust is making sure we're communicating and having meaningful conversations, that really stood out to me of like how lacking that still is, and what an impact that has on the team level trust with each other. And
Yeah.
then org level, I love that you called out that leaders are the root cause. And that is hard for founders, leaders, CEOs sometimes to grapple with, but that is oftentimes the case when I'm coming into an organization. A lot of times it's, the founder leaders bringing me in because they're like, hey, there's HR drama with my team and my people. A month in, I'm having a conversation with them saying, hey, you might be the root cause here. There might be some things here that we need to work on and, help you process through because there's turbulence here that you probably don't see. It's creating lack of trust in your organization. Sometimes founders, CEOs, those leaders are so stuck in the day to day and, putting out fires and, especially if it's a more chaotic environment, they're
Yeah.
just in it and they don't see how they're showing up affects
Yeah.
the whole team. And so in order to increase organizational trust, we need to make sure we're increasing, their own development and awareness and their strength as a leader. And that's why it really, like, I've not surprising, a lot of people are coming to you now and going, it's like, how do we do leader development?
Right.
Because they're starting to see this and be like, wow, I need to pause as well. And none of this is really going to matter unless I'm doing it myself, unless
Yeah.
I'm putting the work in myself. We can put band-aids on things, but I love that you just pointed out that that is the root cause.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we can, those band-aids will work for a time period, but if we really want to make a holistic, systemic change, we have to make sure you're focusing on you and developing your, leadership and how you're showing up every day.
Yeah. And that's actually big news because a lot of times, especially in the spaces where you and I have walked in the past, in the whole talent space and the HR space, is oftentimes there's the conversations about executive buy-in. And we describe executive participation. So whoever that most senior sponsor is, it's not because of role modeling, although that matters. So modeling the behavior of development, but it's because that's going to be a big part of the problem, and the solution will be those most senior leaders. So if they're not actually participating, and like when we're using tools in the Wild Toolkit or whatever, it's they have to be in that. I so appreciate that, Phil. And then the one thing you were referencing in the composure piece and the conflict piece at the team level was that, and you referenced this, that composure was one of the lowest in conflict moments, was one of the lowest rating areas at the team level, and yet it was one of the most important drivers. And so that's
Yep.
what Phil's talking about there. If you spoke from your deepest convictions about the importance of a strategic approach to your people development efforts, you're speaking to people, what did the Phil convictions about that, what would you say about a strategic approach to your people development efforts that you want people to hear?
This changes lives. Like as leaders, and I get like passionate and emotional at times thinking about this because as leaders, we have the people under us, like we are stewarding those people and they have, like we have them for 40 hours a week. They're the majority of their life they're spending with us. And we have that one glimpse to be a light in their life, to show them even what trust is, what hope is, what, to learn and to grow. And that might be the only time they ever have that in their life. And so we have this unique moment in space to make an impact on their lives, not just for our business and for our own success, but for actually their life and their family and their communities. Really see it as that, like, that ripple in the pond. We have people and we're creating, and we have people strategy that is actually creating life-giving workplaces that leads to life-giving environments outside of work. Now they're learning how to trust people in their team. And how do I build trust with my wife? How do I build trust with my friends, with my community? These things ripple out. And we have a captive audience. We have employees that are looking up to us and saying, what do you want me to do? How do you want me to behave? I'm here. I want to give back. So I see it so often. Like people just don't see that weight and that stewardship responsibility to that and that chance that we have. That person might only be with us for a year or two. A lot of times that's what the average tenure is, about 2+ years, right?
Yeah.
And so we have 2 years with that person, most likely, and sometimes more, sometimes less, but we have an opportunity to make a difference in their life with our people strategies, how we're showing up every day, how we're leading them, how we're guiding them. For me, like I just see that, and I put so much on how do we do that better? How do we help, and create those moments where they feel like, wow, like something's different here. And they're walking away not just with career experience, but possibly life-changing experience in their relationships, in their career, in their family. And ultimately that's affecting the community that they're around.
So Phil, one of the things I'm also curious about is I know that you have access and work with boards and different kinds of organizations that you would say they should be assessing trust as a key metric. Curious about your take on that. Like,
Yeah, as a board, you want to have your pulse on just the organizational health, right? And how are our people, and especially boards with, nonprofits, churches, there's probably a desire and we want to care for our people and create great, like, life-giving workplaces. But my hunch is that nobody's actually monitoring that or measuring it in particular. But yet it's probably a core thing that, like, if you ask them, they're like, yeah, like I want a culture that has high trust. I want a culture that we're, caring for our people and that we're retaining them, we're attracting top talent, we're retaining them, they're thriving here. And so for boards, I'm always like, how are you measuring that? If people are the number one item on your on your budget, right? Payroll is the largest line item, and we value people, and you want to have a culture that is, high trust, caring. How are we measuring it? How are you monitoring that? You can't just take the executive director, leader's perspective on it. They're going to tell you, oh yeah, everything's great, or these things. But for me, if we're doing this and we have a metric that we can say, here's the actual, like, net trust index of the organization, we can monitor that twice a year. Then for me, that's a leading indicator for turnover
yeah,
and for performance.
yeah,
And that's a leading indicator for change. Like, can we push it? Like, is now the time for an acquisition? If we're
yeah,
monitoring, like, we have high levels of trust right now, and the last two trust indexes have been really high, maybe we can be a little bit more, risky right now with an acquisition, and our company can withstand change because there's a high level of trust. But if we see trust is really low, and then we're going to do this acquisition, or we're going to do this big change, big, we're going to open up multiple campuses and we're going to really expand rapidly, then you're going to probably have to monitor and have a game plan for what's going to go, what's going to happen when things go south and when, a third of your company leaves,
yeah,
because that's probably what's going to happen. And so for me, if we can monitor it, for me, that helps boards make better decisions and
yeah,
steward the organization better. And so for finally having a metric that they can measure it, for me, this should be just a standard, just like
yeah,
profit,
yeah,
profit margin, like trust index, like where is it at? Let's measure it twice a year. And then that gives us the pulse. And then if we see things trending down, then we can ask some follow-up questions of like, all right, what's actually going on here? What did we learn? What are you doing as a leadership team to address that? So yeah, I think
yeah,
every board
yeah.
should have some people metrics they're monitoring it. And for me, this was a game changer when I came across it. Like, it was
Uh,
one of those aha light bulb moments of like, every board needs this. Every board
yeah.
needs to be measuring this because of its impact and the decision-making input it provides for them.
You know how we think of currency, every organizational leader knows they need literal resourcing and money to do
Yeah,
anything.
yeah.
And trust is this thing that we all know is this other invisible currency, right? That's occurring all the time.
Mm.
What if you could make that invisible currency just as visible as your money? Like,
I don't know. I just think it's so tied. And if leaders really understood the impact that they have in people's lives and how that then affects the community and the world, I think we would actually pause and probably put a little more investment into these things than we're doing now. But yeah, I get passionate about that and excited to be
yeah,
a part of that change
yeah,
and being like, how do we, with this opportunity, affect the people on our team and help develop and make a change in the world.
yeah. I'm so honored to be on the journey with you, to be affiliated with you. I would also tell our listeners like strategic partnerships with trusted people are really, really important for your missional impact. And so grateful to be on the journey with you, Phil. So good.
Yeah, yeah, likewise. I appreciate everything you guys are building. It
Yeah.
really is, like I said, it is making a difference and it's making people see things from a different lens that I think is life changing, because
Yeah.
it's not just trust in the organizations for the organization's wins. It's about doing that so that relationships are changed.
Yeah.
And that is powerful. not just in the business, but in our world. So thank you for
Right.
leaning into
Yeah.
this, creating tools that make a huge difference in the world.
Phil, thank you for such a rich conversation and a perspective to wrap us up. We want the listeners and people watching to know how they can connect with you. Tell them the best way to find you and where to connect.
Yeah, so you can go to my website, talentrealize.co. I have links on there if you want to just grab a virtual coffee, talk about trust, talk about anything people, talent. I like to tell people you now have a chief people officer best friend. And so I love helping people. If you get stuck, every week where I see calls come up and just people are stuck and just want to have a quick call, that's life-giving for me. So don't hesitate to reach out and have those. But you go to my website, you can find all the information about me and my team, and then there's links there to schedule a coffee if you want to just grab a virtual coffee and chat anything people, HR, talent. Happy to do it.
And we have one last wild question. Phil, are you in a season of accepting yourself or changing yourself?
Changing myself. As a leader founder, I'm in a transition period with my company that is forcing me to change, and I have to adapt and try to look at areas where I need to grow, because what's gotten me here is not going to get me to where I want to go, and so I
Yeah.
have to do that.
Thank you for listening to this Wild Conversation podcast. For more information, visit wildleaders.org, click on the Wild Trust platform, and get started with the Wild Trust Index today.